whatever I emphasize in the lecture, make sure that you're ready for it. Or maybe you might come into the lecture and I might give you like a practice quiz on Wednesday. Who knows? It could go either way. But remember, it's non-punitive, like, meaning it's not like it affects your grade. It's just it's extra credit points. So keep that in mind. All right, continuing. We're talking about the action of ACTH, adrenocorticotrophic hormone. We are still in the cortex of the adrenal gland, and we are moving away from our discussion of aldosterone, right, into the next class. That's the mineralocorticoid class, into the glucocorticoid class, and the secretion is cortisol. So just to get you reoriented to what it is we're doing, here are the layers in the cortex: the zona glomerulosa, fasciculata, reticularis. I would expect that you would be able to match these things up. That would be my expectation, okay, in terms of the zones. We just spoke about the mineralocorticoids coming out of the glomerulosa. We talked about aldosterone. We talked about electrolyte balance and why it's so important. Moving away from that into the fasciculata to talk about the glucocorticoid cortisol. This is released in response to stimulation by ACTH. And we can see, look at the two effects at the top. It's going to function in blood sugar regulation, and it's going to function in helping maintain the pressure, specifically through the action of vasoconstriction, which we should talk about right now. Okay? So vasoconstriction versus vasodilation. When you see that term, you should immediately think vaso means blood vessel, right? And constriction of the blood vessel. So vasoconstriction is the constriction of the blood vessels. Blood vessels contain blood. Hopefully that's flowing. When you constrict a blood vessel, right, it has the effect of increasing the pressure in that vessel, or at least for the blood that's behind that stricture, behind that closure. Okay? So, one way in which we can homeostatically raise systemic blood pressure is by the constriction of blood vessels. By constricting the blood vessels, it increases resistance and it increases the pressure inside. So you might be like, what's she talking about? This is what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a blood vessel, right? The blood vessel is a tube, right? Think about the blood. Blood is a fluid tissue, right? It's a fluid tissue which is flowing through the vessel. It's going to, the rate of flow is dependent upon a bunch of factors that we'll learn about, but if I change the size, the diameter of the blood vessel by doing this, by constricting it, right, it's actually going to, the force with which the blood is hitting the vessel wall is going to increase, right? So imagine I have this giant lumen and the blood is flowing through. If I were going to measure the pressure inside that vessel, I would be measuring the force of the fluid, right? It's like hydrostatic pressure against the wall, right, of the vessel. That's what I'm measuring. So vessels that are open, right, that don't have a lot of impediments to flow, generally the pressure would be very low. But as I close that diameter, right, we're going to see that there's this kind of like inverse relationship, right, between the vessel diameter and the blood pressure, right? So as the vessel diameter gets smaller, the pressure increases, right? So what are your glucocorticoids doing for you? They're increasing your blood pressure and keeping energy available in the form of glucose. See this term here? This is a term you should know. It's called gluconeogenesis, and it is what it sounds like. Gluco means glucose, neo means new, genesis means formation, creation, or to make. So gluconeogenesis is to make new glucose, right? So you have to ask yourself, glucose is an organic compound. What is it made up of? Glucose is made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. That's what it's made up of. So cortisol right, is going to promote, as it says here, the formation of glucose from fats and proteins. And by doing this, we say that cortisol has what's known as a glucose sparing effect, or a glucose saving effect, meaning, it allows the available glucose to be available for your brain. So not only do all the tissues of the body need glucose, your brain needs glucose as well. And your brain is what's keeping you alive and going, right? It's basically running the show. So we want protections in terms of homeostasis and in terms of balance to get that brain what it needs, which is glucose, right? So we have pathways, regulatory pathways in the body which make that glucose available, right? And so it's not shunted in other places. So we have mechanisms to convert other forms of energy, right? Other organic compounds into glucose, which cells can then utilize to make ATP and keep you alive. Okay. Keep going. I'm going to talk about these right now. So we're going to drop right down into, you guys can look this over yourself. We'll do more details of this when we get to reproduction. But like in a general way, you guys should take a look at the gonadotrophoids, right? So moving away from, we're still in the adrenal gland, moving out of the cortex and moving down into the center portion that's referred to as the medullary region or the medulla, okay? And looking at the primary secretion here, which is epinephrine and norepinephrine. And when you guys learned about sympathetic and parasympathetic responses in Bio 11, right, you learned about these. And if you did not, or if it's been a long time, this is something that you should review. So for our purposes right now, what I want to do is I want to go here. I want to go to this slide. And I want to go to this slide because I want to look at, with you, I want to look at the title of the slide, Stress and the Adrenal Gland. So this schematic, this figure represents the various responses, right, stress responses that are mediated by the adrenal gland in various ways, okay? So this is the one we talked about, these already, okay? We talked about this pathway, right? The mineralocorticoids and the glucocorticoids, the aldosterone and the cortisol, and the mobilization, right? The mobilization of electrolytes and water, okay? The mobilization of energy pathways, for purposes of metabolism, blood sugar, all that stuff. And then at the same time, okay, another response that is more kind of a faster response on this side refers to the medullary region. So the medullary region, look at the stimulation. So if we were to look here, we know that this particular pathway, right, the signaling pathway that takes place here is via the pituitary, right? Pituitary ACTH is released, gets to the cortex, and then we get the production of aldosterone and cortisol, and then they have their effects. Yes? That's that pathway. This pathway, look at how it's mediated, right? So it's mediated, so we have the cross-section of the spine, and then we have sympathetic fiber that's actually innervating the medullary gland. So let's think about this for a second. So we have right, nerve fibers, right, that are innervate our muscles, right, and innervate our glands, don't we? We have nerve fibers which innervate muscles and glands. So we learned about the details of, right, motor neuron innervation into skeletal muscles. We learned about that, right? This is not that pathway, right? So in this pathway, one thing that we have to learn about in Bio 12 is we're going to start looking at a lot of our involuntary pathways, our sympathetic and parasympathetic pathways. So just think about it for a second, right? Most of the organs and organ systems that we're going to study in the class, okay, are involuntary by nature. And so what are we saying here? What am I trying to put together here? What we're trying to put together here is that of the adrenal medulla, right, by sympathetic chain to then produce the secretion of the medullary region, epinephrine and norepinephrine. Okay, let's continue. All right, so guys, you can look at the pineal gland and its secretion. We've all spent a lot of time on, insulin glucagon, but let's make sure that you know these terms, okay? So, gluconeogenesis and then glycogenolysis. So, let's look at the root. Like, the root is glycogen, right? And then lysis. So, it literally translates into what it is, right? Break down glycogen to liberate glucose. So if you're not sure what glycogen is a complex form of stored carbohydrate, stored in the muscles, stored in the liver. So it's a reservoir of nutrients that are available to us, right, that we can break down if additional energy is needed. There's one pathway. But we have other pathways as well, right? We have gluconeogenesis, like I mentioned previously, where we can make, as it says here, where we can make the glucose from non-carbohydrate sources and get it into the blood. All right. You all know this pathway. And if you don't, you haven't been around for a while, you're gonna have to review this insulin glucagon pathway. Okay. So the last thing that we're going to say about insulin before talking about some of the other tissues, okay, is let's take a look at what we have here for a second. Okay, so I suspect, maybe not, could be wrong, but I suspect that maybe for a lot of us in the class, the understanding about insulin release might be limited to the first bullet. Okay, so let's sort of elaborate. Let's elaborate on that. Just a little bit more. So, although we don't know the specifics of it, and I would always tell you like specifically what I would expect you to know on an exam, let's just appreciate for a moment, right, that the coordination of all of the activity of all of these hormones together, right, to maintain homeostasis, right, in terms of blood sugar regulation. Okay, so glucagon, epinephrine, growth hormone, thyroxine, glucocorticoids. We focused somewhat on these hormones today. So the first thing that I want to say, right, so insulin, glucagon, right, these are antagonistic hormones, right? They work in opposition to each other, right? So insulin has the effect of lowering or raising the blood sugar. Lowering. Whereas glucagon would have the effect of raising the blood sugar. Why is the hormone epinephrine on a list, right, of hormones on a slide that says factors that influence insulin release? So that must mean that epinephrine influences the release of insulin. Who can talk about that? Go ahead.
I think that is about the stress, maybe, that, for example, if your body is in a stress, then the sugar goes up. So the epinephrine actually makes this fight
response.
so maybe it's connected to that, and then when the sugar goes up.
Why does the sugar go up? You said when the epinephrine is released, the sugar goes up. Why are you saying that?
Because what I know that very often when the body is in the constant stress, then the sugars go up.
Okay. Yeah, but what would be a reason why sugar would be up or needed? What would be a reason why? So let me rephrase the question. We're trying to make this connection between the release of epinephrine in response to stress, and then we're trying to tie it a little bit more specifically. You got it. I just want you to be a little bit more specific. I want to know why we need sugar regulation when epinephrine is released.
So maybe for the APA, the energy release, so the body can, you know.
Yeah, right. So it's going to mobilize energy resources, right? So when epinephrine is released in stressful conditions and metabolically, right, cells need energy. We need the delivery of glucose into cells. How do you get glucose into your cells? Insulin, right? So just think about that for a second. So we're looking at this connection between blood sugar regulation via insulin. Just be logical, right? What does insulin do? Insulin promotes the uptake, right? Promotes the uptake of glucose into our cells. So then we have to say, what are we doing that for, right? We're doing it metabolically to make ATP, to make cellular fuel, so that the cell can do all its chemical activity, so it can perform, right? Right? So, what is a factor? So we're looking at this list of, factors, like what are the various things that actually influence, as it says up there, the release of it. So do you see how I'm making that connection between the two? Right? Between it, not just memorizing, these are involved, in insulin release, right? That doesn't mean anything, right? We have to dissect out each one and say, how is it involved? Okay? So, as I go through the list, I look at glucagon and I say, oh, glucagon is an agonist. It opposes it, right? So glucagon and insulin are working together, right? Push, pull, up, right? Modulation, increasing and lowering. How is epinephrine involved, right? Epinephrine is involved, right, to the extent that in insulin release, and that epinephrine, right, basically drives metabolism up, right? Drives all of the activity up, which requires energy. Okay? You do the next one. You see what I just did out loud? I made the connections. Talk to the person next to you and figure out this growth hormone one. Why is growth hormone a factor that influences insulin release? Talk to the person next to you about that.
Have to do with insulin. guys have the, I'm sorry, you guys have the
Guys,
form
what'd you
little
call
chart?
Any of these? Growth hormone, thyroxine, glucocorticoids? So you feel like you're on time? A little weak? Yeah. When did you all take Lot 11?
Last time.
Last semester? Okay. And was it super solid? Was it good?
I started sliding.
Why are we at this time? For what purpose? Nursing, PA, pharmacy. Right, PA. Right. Let's get it. So what did we come up with? Let me come a little closer.
What you guys say?
So the question that was posed to you was the following. I wanted to know why glucagon epinephrine, growth hormone, thyroxine, and glucocorticoids, why do they influence the release of insulin? How do they influence the release of insulin? Okay? So when you see insulin release, this is what you're supposed to think. You should say, insulin is released when cells need glucose, right? When levels of glucose in the blood are, very high, when they're available. If levels of glucose in the blood are too high, it needs to be removed from the blood and pulled into the cells, right? So these are like all the reasons why the glucose has to be pulled in. So that's the first part of the question, right? The dynamic that we're discussing here, the mechanism we're talking about, is insulin release. So the first question is, what is insulin release? What causes insulin release? All these things on this list, right, are connected to the release of insulin for various reasons. That's what we're exploring, okay? So I have asked you guys to look at growth hormone, thyroxine, and glucocorticoids to see what is their connection to the release of insulin. I talked to a whole bunch of students, and one group of students said growth hormone is connected to the release of insulin because growth hormone promotes growth. It promotes processes like protein synthesis, and that requires energy, right? That requires glucose, right? So there's going to be that connection between those two things. Thyroxine is the primary metabolic regulator in the cells. And what about a primary metabolic regulator in cells? It's actually going to promote the utilization of glucose, right? So insulin and thyroxine are kind of tied together in that way. And then the glucocorticoids, this is the cortisol. I think some students up here in the front, we're talking, it's very similar to epinephrine, right? In terms of the stress response and making energy available. Okay. All right, we're going to leave that there. And I want to go now to other structures. So it may be the case, but I will always be very explicit before an exam, what I expect you to know. Am I going to be able to go through every idea with a fine-tooth comb with you? No. But if there's something in class that I don't get a chance to cover, but that is going to be included in the exam, I will let you know about that, in plenty of time. All right? And it's usually things that I do that with. They're very accessible and very easy to understand. All right. So other hormone-producing structures are going to refer to, right, organs or tissues in the body or specialized cells within the body whose primary function is not to produce a hormone, it does something else, right? So for example, the stomach has the ability to produce hormones, right? But the primary function of the stomach is digestion, right? The heart produces hormones, like A&P. Its function, right, is circulation. So we're going to look at some examples of that. So the specifics of these will become important. They're just getting introduced today because they become important in the digestion chapter, which is the next chapter. So I had thought we would have gotten a little bit further along. We didn't, and that's okay. But these will be used, and the pathways will be explored in the digestion chapter, so they're just going to be introduced today. But you should definitely jot these down, just to start to become familiar with them, because I will tell you the digestive system, there's a lot to it. It's not necessarily hard, there's just a lot of information. So when we look at this list, we can see a whole bunch of hormones that are produced by specialized cells that are that line or embedded within the digestive tract itself. And these hormones are important, right? All hormones are chemicals, basically, right? Chemical signals, right? And chemical signaling is important in terms of in this case, the regulation of digestion. So what we're going to learn is we're going to learn that the secretions from these enteroendocrine cells are important in the regulation of the digestive process. That's going to be like the end game, right? Entero means intestine endocrine. So an enteroendocrine cell, right, is a hormone-producing cell that's embedded within the GI tract. Okay, so these will come, these secretions are going to come into play when we talk about the digestive system. The other hormone that I want to touch on, there's just one hormone I want to touch on here for now. And again, more details when we get to it, is the hormone EPO under kidney, erythropoietin. So EPO is a hormone that's produced by the kidneys in response to low levels of oxygen in the body. And we're not going to name those states yet, like we're not going to name them like, anoxia, hypoxia, we will. But let's just say, right, when oxygen levels decline in the body, that's going to, the kidney is going to actually detect that. Remember that the kidney is processing blood, and when the kidney processes the blood and detects low levels of oxygen, it's going to respond by producing the hormone EPO. So I have a question for you. So, and the response that the EPO is going to have is going to be the production of red blood cells. So, you tell me, where are red blood cells produced in the body? Bone marrow. Yeah, bone marrow. So it's going to target the bone marrow, and it's going to stimulate the process of red blood cell formation. So the tissue within the bone marrow that produces blood cells, right? It's a specific kind of tissue, right? It's called hematopoietic tissue, which we'll learn about, okay? So what are we talking about? So we're saying that the kidneys, while they're processing the blood, balancing water in the body, balancing electrolytes, right? Processing and producing urine, right? They're doing all these other important functions, right? They're checking out your blood pressure, right? Making necessary corrections, and at the same time, checking your oxygenation, okay? At which point, it will then stimulate the production of red blood cells. So how does so what event do you think might lead to, let's say, low levels of oxygen in the body? So if your oxygen is low, what's your problem? What's your problem if your oxygen is low? Where's your oxygen carried in your body? Who's carrying it? Red blood cells are carrying it, yeah. Red blood cells have affinity for oxygen because they contain hemoglobin, right, which has the affinity for oxygen. So if you have low levels of oxygen, something's going on with your red blood cells, right? Either not binding the oxygen, right, in the first place, maybe you don't have enough red blood cells, okay? What would be a reason that you wouldn't have enough red blood cells? Do red blood cells live forever? No, actually very short lifespan, right? They live for like 125 days or something like that. They don't live very long, okay? So what is an event that could happen to you which could cause your red blood cell number to go down? What disease? A bone disease, like which one? So maybe like a thalassemia, or maybe a blood disease where there is the production of red blood cells is thwarted. That's one. What's another thing that can happen? Anemia. Okay. What about trauma? Trauma. What if you're cooking and you chop your finger off? You're gonna lose. I mean, you could. I mean, hopefully you're not. You're gonna deal with that. But if you have a severe injury, right, and you can lose a lot of blood, right? And then if you're a woman, if you're a female, and if you have like menstrual bleeding that's super heavy for a really, really long period of time, you can actually become anemic for that, right? You become anemic, and then you would start to get shortness of breath, right? Because of very low oxygen in the body. So erythropoietin is going to detect this problem of low oxygen, and it's going to respond. And the response is create more red blood cells to increase the oxygen carrying capability of the blood. It's going to correct the problem, right? So while you think of your kidney as, a filter doing the things that I already described before, it's also doing this. Super important. And we mentioned the renin previously, right? So, two things tied to the kidney that are very important. Okay. So I just want to do a little introduction to the digestive system before you go. Or I just looked at the time, so I'm actually going to modify that because I thought I had 4 minutes left. And we're going to watch a quick summary animation with stress. So, just kind of a friendly reminder, I would recommend that you try these. These are like interactive practice. They're kind of basic, but you should do them. In your PDF, your textbook, as you're reading 1120, right? Yeah. In your textbook, at the end of each section, you've got some really good thought questions. You might want to take a look at those. And as I said, when you come, when I see you again on Wednesday, maybe we're just going to have like a practice quiz. I'll give you a bunch of questions. Let's see how you do. Let's see where you're at. Or maybe it's going to be a lecture quiz, right? So lecture quizzes are general questions based on the previous lecture. Okay? So that means if I'm going to give that, then I would only, those questions would be confined to that. And it's just going to be 10 quick questions, a combination of multiple choice and fill in. All right. So you've got some practice sets here as well, and then you've got some summary animations. If you didn't do so already, you might want to watch Crash Course in Anatomy and Physiology. It might help to kind of bring everything together. Let's check this out. All right, so I'm not going to do these. The first and second one, they're really good, but they go on a little bit further than they need to. These are nice animations which are showing you the pathways, the 2 pathways for hormone interaction with cells, right? So hormones either interact with the plasma receptor or an intracellular receptor, so you can check that out. Okay? And then we've got these 2 talking about the hypothalamus and pituitary working together, but this is the one that I want to go on, right? Our body's response to stress. So let's check it out. And hopefully we'll have samples. See what happens. Too loud.
The hypothalamus corrects the body's stress response. Sends information about the stressful condition to the hypothalamus, which then engages both the nervous and endocrine systems in response. The hypothalamus engages the sympathetic nervous system in a neural and endocrine response. The well-known fight or flight response, which prepares the body. The nervous system sends information about the stressful condition to the hypothalamus, which then engages both the nervous and endocrine systems in response. The hypothalamus engages the sympathetic nervous system in a neural and endocrine response, the well-known fight or flight response, which prepares the body for immediate physical action. In a combination of direct action by the sympathetic fibers and epinephrine from the adrenal medulla, cardiac output, CO, increases, ventilation increases, blood pressure rises, and is maintained at a level adequate to drive blood to the working organs, and blood flow is redirected from the GI system and other quiescent organs to skeletal muscle and the heart. Sweating is stimulated. Epinephrine reinforces the actions of the sympathetic system, especially relaxation of the airways and dilation of blood vessels to skeletal muscle and the heart. Epinephrine directly stimulates tissues to meet increased metabolic needs. The major effects of epinephrine are stimulation of glycogenolysis and liver and skeletal muscle, gluconeogenesis in the liver, and lipolysis in adipose tissue. Glucose and fatty acids provide fuel for working organs. Notice that this metabolic pattern is similar to the pattern in the post-absorptive state. The activity of the sympathetic system and epinephrine inhibit the release of insulin and stimulate glucagon. Glucagon reinforces the fasting metabolic state, and the active inhibition of insulin is essential to keep plasma glucose levels high. The fast-acting catecholamines initiate the stress response. They produce rapid short-term changes because they are secreted rapidly from storage vesicles, and they act rapidly on target cells. The effects end quickly when catecholamines are removed. The hypothalamus stimulates release of corticotropin-releasing hormone that causes secretion of ACTH and ultimately cortisol for a more prolonged response. Because its synthesis and release are slow, and cellular responses require transcription and translation, the effects of cortisol occur after a lag of about 30 minutes. Adrenal cortical hormones maintain and amplify the effects of adrenal medullary hormones. Together, the two parts of the adrenal gland act as a functional unit that first initiates and then maintains and modulates the response to stress. Remember that cortisol is a glucocorticoid named for its effects on glucose metabolism. Cortisol mobilizes energy stores and stimulates breakdown of protein, providing amino acids to the liver to produce glucose. The amino acids can also be used to repair damaged tissue. Cortisol acts on the liver to both produce glucose and store it as glycogen. Cortisol stimulates breakdown of triglycerides in adipose tissue that increases fatty acids for fuel and glycerol for producing glucose in the liver. Fuels continue to be made available: glucose for the brain and fatty acids for other tissues to ensure survival at a time when an individual may not be able to eat. In the presence of norepinephrine, cortisol enhances the constriction of blood vessels. This is an important contribution to maintaining blood pressure. Cortisol also inhibits inflammation and other aspects of the immune system, keeping it in check. Aldosterone is secreted from the adrenal cortex in response to increased angiotensin. It promotes retention of salt and water to maintain blood volume and blood pressure. Vasopressin, ADH, is secreted from the posterior pituitary. It promotes water retention and, with angiotensin, directs vasoconstriction effects. This response becomes more complicated as combinations of the hormones we have discussed act to reinforce existing effects and add others. The nervous and endocrine systems maximize gas exchange, mobilize fuel, and maintain the necessary pressure to deliver blood to essential organs. These two systems work together to maintain high levels of oxygen and nutrients in the bloodstream and to ensure their delivery to essential organs. Pathological changes in the secretory activity of the adrenal medulla are rare. There are no recognized pathologies that cause hyposecretion of the catecholamines from the adrenal medulla. Because the sympathetic nervous system may replace many of the functions of the adrenal catecholamines, an individual can live without the adrenal medulla as long as the sympathetic nervous system is intact and functioning. A rare tumor called a pheochromocytoma, usually found in the adrenal medulla, secretes large amounts of the catecholamines and is not controlled by the sympathetic nervous system. Symptoms associated with pheochromocytoma may be persistent or intermittent. Episodic symptoms can arise from probing the tumor, standing up or lying down, or abdominal pressure. This patient has a pheochromocytoma and has come to the doctor today because he feels very ill with many of the symptoms of hypersecretion of catecholamines. Based on what we know about the actions of catecholamines, especially epinephrine, here are the symptoms that the patient might have: high blood pressure, excessive sweating, palpitations, rapid heart rate, and high blood glucose. The most prominent feature in patients with a pheochromocytoma is hypertension. Catecholamines act on the cardiovascular system to maximize cardiac output by increasing heart rate and force of contraction. Catecholamines increase total peripheral resistance. Increases in cardiac output and peripheral resistance cause blood pressure to rise. The treatment of choice for a pheochromocytoma is surgical removal of the tumor. Secretion of catecholamine hormones then returns to normal and is again under the control of the sympathetic nervous system. One way that scientists learn about the endocrine system is to observe the symptoms of patients who secrete too much or too little of a particular hormone. Two relatively rare diseases of the adrenal gland help illustrate some of the functions of cortisol. Cushing's disease, or hypercortisolism, occurs when the body is exposed to high levels of cortisol for a prolonged period. Addison's disease, or primary adrenal insufficiency, occurs when the adrenal glands produce too little cortisol and too little aldosterone. Cushing's disease is caused by tumors of the pituitary that secrete increased amounts of ACTH. It is the most common cause of hypercortisolism. Hypercortisolism, from all other causes, such as glucocorticoid drugs, is called Cushing's syndrome. The glucocorticoid prednisone may be prescribed for asthma, rheumatoid arthritis, other inflammatory diseases, or for immunosuppression following an organ transplant. Addison's disease is caused by damage to the adrenal cortex, inducing hyposecretion of both cortisol and aldosterone. Hyposecretion of cortisol from other causes such as pituitary damage and subsequent lack of ACTH produces similar symptoms. In this case, aldosterone secretion is normal. Cushing's patients experience paradoxical accumulation of fat that produces a round moon face and a buffalo hump on the back. A cardinal symptom of Addison's disease is a change in skin pigmentation that produces a bronzed color. Based on what we have learned about cortisol, let's answer the following question about the symptoms of Cushing's and Addison's. Which patient has hypoglycemia? One function of cortisol is to promote production and release of glucose. Lack of cortisol in Addison's patients results in low plasma glucose. Which patient may exhibit signs of steroid diabetes? Hyperglycemia in Cushing's patients can lead to diabetes mellitus. The chronic increase in insulin levels induced by hyperglycemia can cause pancreatic beta cells to fail. These high levels...
Okay, I think that's a good place to stop. So, do I expect you to know every detail of that? No, absolutely not, right? That's the big picture. I'm going to be posting a summary of today's lecture, like the most important